And walking is not about burning calories. It's about using your feet to cover different planes and ranges of motion and terrain, and to let the feet inform the rest of the body.
You adapt to what you do most frequently. We're all we're like the ninjas of sitting. We're chair athletes.
There was a study done some years ago that people who could get up and down off the floor without putting their hands down lived longer.
Our ability to move, our mobility, our ability to cross the room, cross the state, cross the country, go around the world and experiences are what give life a tremendous amount of quality. All of the movement that we do in the gym sort of is based around foot health. All of the things that we do, walking and hiking and playing sports, it's all based around foot health. It's all based around how strong your feet are as a foundation, and then how that how the information. Look, we evolved barefoot, and we spent 2.5 million years as bipedal barefoot creatures with this organ that senses changes in terrain and immediately feeds information to the brain on how to flex the ankle, how to bend the knee, how to torque the hip, how to absorb shock on a downhill. All of this information, the brain is ready, willing, and able as a processor to distribute throughout the body. And then here we are wearing thick shoes that negate all of this sensory information, and we wear these thick shoes in the name of they're more comfortable, they're cushiony, they're whatever, or we have high arches in our shoes because somebody said a while back, well, I guess we should support the arch because some people have collapsed arches. Well, most people who have bad arches have arches because they haven't worked those muscles of the feet. So proprioception, again, is that ability that you have to sense changes in ground underneath you and to be able to adapt to changes not just in surface but in elevation. So you think about that person we talked about, the iconic trip in the middle of the night kind of person. Typically, their feet are not very strong, and so they've become atrophied to the point, I hate to use the term, but they're like stumps. They're literally like you're activating knees and the calf, but the feet are just like stumps. You're like walking on, and you want them to be grabbing the ground. You literally want toes to be able to grab the ground. If you've ever surfed, your feet can control the surfboard by literally gripping the top of the board. That's why they wax the board sometimes, all the time.
That's why you don't see reindeer surfing.
So, there you go.
We got hooves out here. That's what we're doing to ourselves.
No, exactly. So the proprioception is, again, it's this thing that we have this recipe within us to be able to take advantage of this, and we lose it. We just sort of bypass it and think, well, in the interest of, like a lot of people have bunions. Well, the bunions are a problem from too restrictive shoes, from feet that are being toes, they're being scrunched together. Now you get bunions. And then you think, well, now I have to have comfortable shoes because my bunions hurt. So I'm going to get big, thick, wide toe box, cushiony shoes. And all that does is sort of exacerbate the issue. I wrote 20 years ago, I described the primal blueprint and the 10 primal blueprint laws, and one of the exercise hierarchy was move around a lot at a low level of activity. What that means is walk or hike or ride a bike, but walking counts just as much as anything else. And walking is not about burning calories. It's about the movement. It's about using your feet to cover different planes and ranges of motion and terrains, and to let the feet inform the rest of the body how to flex the ankle, how to bend the knee, how to torque the hip. How to adjust for the eccentric motion of braking. So move around a lot at a low level of activity. What does that look like? It looks like 5 hours a week, right? May sound like a lot to some people. I can't run 5 hours a week. Don't. Walk a half hour some day, an hour another day, ride a bike a little bit. 5 hours, you can get that in. Go to the gym twice a week. Now, when I say go to the gym, if your jam is body weight exercises at the local park where they have a parkour or they have a swing set set up or whatever. But go to the gym twice a week and what we call lift heavy things. Lift heavy things twice a week, and not 2 days in a row, because you want to get time in between to build the muscle, recover, get stronger as a result of having done that. So a couple of days in between. So at least twice a week. Some people are going to go to the gym 4 times a week. Okay, if you can handle that, fine. But my minimum strategy, again, move around a lot at a low level of activity, lift heavy things twice a week, and sprint once a week. Why sprint? Well, again, if we're calling upon our ancestral recipe, our ancestors had to either run for their lives once in a while, either to get away from something that was going to kill them or to run towards something that they needed to eat, and get the heart rate up to a max level. And again, not a lot. I mean, I'm going to say 4 to 8 sets of 30 seconds is plenty. And people find that it's one of the most productive workouts they'll do. And you don't have to give minimal rest in between. You could rest a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes in between. But once a week, sprint. I use the term generically and broadly. Sprinting for most people, they think, on a track. But sprinting for me would be the assault bike, right, at the gym, or the Versaclimber at the gym, or even on the treadmill, walking really hard up a 15-degree incline, or the elliptical, or the swimming pool, or there's so many ways that the idea isn't to sprint like Usain Bolt. The idea is to do whatever it is using as many body parts as possible to get the heart rate up to the highest you can get it for 20, 30, 40 seconds. It's so funny because, again, I saw something, Huberman Lab did this the other day. He made a big deal about this new revelation that we have to do something that elevates our heart once a week for 60 seconds. I'm like, dude, I've been talking about that for 20 years. And I'm not the only one. Humanity's been talking about that for 2 million years. So, but we talked early on about, where we headed as a society and AI and virtual worlds and all this stuff. And, if we just go back and look at what nature, how we evolved through this crucible of scarcity and harsh climate, our genes still expect that of us in order to thrive, in order to be the best that we can be. So if you can sprint once a week, just like your ancestors had to sprint, if you can go to the gym twice a week and lift heavy things, or go to the park and do your body weight exercise or whatever, and if you can move around as much as you can throughout the day at a low level of activity without ever paying attention to the amount of calories you burned or the steps, just the time, you are 85% of your way to being as fit as you could be.
I realized, I'm like, wow, number one, if I had something that I could wear that was allowing my feet to do what they needed to do, I probably could have kept playing soccer. But number two, the amount that's missed because people are wearing the wrong footwear and not actually using their feet. There's a lot of shoes that are great. They're comfortable. They're marketed to feel like you're walking on clouds. Take out that super comfortable shoes. But the feet aren't getting the work they need to get. This is the first contact that you have with the ground every single morning. When you're walking, when you're running, you're sending shocks up your body, forces that your body then needs to handle. But if your foot is weak and not able to handle those forces in the way that they need to handle them, that pain will go to your knee. That pain will go to your lower back. That pain could go all the way to your neck and your head. And then you end up with individuals with really bad gait meaning your walking cycle, like their feet are pointed outwards. There's a lot of imbalances that can happen in the muscles, but a lot of that starts with the feet. Now, the problem here is that, how do I fix that? A simple way is to start walking barefoot. And that's good. That's going to be beneficial, but not everyone wants to walk around with black feet everywhere, right? Black bottom of the toes.
Got those new black bottoms.
But there's tons of shoes out there. And actually, it's interesting because barefoot shoes had a really, they had a surge in 2011, 2012. I don't know if you remember with Vibrams and those types of shoes. Five fingers.
Yeah.
But then there's someone that made a book called Ready to Run. It wasn't Kelly Starrett, it was somebody else. And after people started doing barefoot running, they started getting all these sorts of injuries and everyone was like, okay, this is not actually good for people. It died down. The reason why it was rough for people is because people didn't give themselves a gradual entry into wearing barefoot shoes or doing barefoot activity. All right. You're now going from wearing a cushiony shoe to wearing a shoe with no drop, meaning flat. So now your feet are taking all these forces that they are not used to taking, and they are not happy. You know, underneath your feet, it hurts. It's painful. It's like, God, this is wild. But this is the thing, your feet are getting stronger and they're getting adapted to now the new forces you're putting through them. And then over time, they'll get better. But it's just like starting to go to the gym or building any new activity. You need to give yourself a gradual approach. You cannot go off the deep end, start running barefoot, start using barefoot shoes. What happened with me is I did start using barefoot shoes, and then I had some pain on the bottom of my feet. I also got like toe spreaders. The ones I would suggest, I don't have a code or anything, but go to correcttoes.com. I've used a lot of different toe spreaders, and these ones are really good, but they'll help you get the space back in between your toes that your feet should have, since most people's toes are here. But when I started, I would do jump rope, I would walk or whatever in these types of shoes. Bottom of my feet would hurt. So I'd go back, I'd wear some of my more cushiony shoes for a little bit of time, let my feet heal and adapt, and then I'd go back to wearing the barefoot shoes again and doing all these activities barefoot. You'll notice over at Super Training, Mark, myself, a lot of us don't wear shoes when we work out because we want our feet to be strong. And it's crazy within the past year, my foot transformation. This is why learning from all these amazing guests that we're able to talk with and ask questions to and this is why you love your job too, because we're able to learn so much and we're able to selfishly, honestly, I'm able to get the benefit from this, and then we share it with people. But my feet, the tendons have gotten thicker, my toe spread is back, I have less pain and discomfort in certain areas of my body. I feel springier because now my feet and toes, my toes I have soreness when doing certain movements in the arches of my feet because they're actually activated. When I was a teenager, the doctor told me I had flat feet. So they gave me orthotics, these special orthotics to put in my cleats to give me an arch. But that artificial arch from those orthotics weren't helping me. They were weakening the arch that I had, and they were causing me to have more foot problems. And this is the thing, it's not the doctor's fault. This is something that they did for everybody. They're like, you need an arch, slip something in there. Rather than, let's develop those weak feet that you've been stuffing in cushioned shoes over your past decade, right? So the feet are something that I think if people can fix that over time, it's not something that happens immediately. You need to, you need to adjust when you're having certain pain. There are certain things you could do. But if you can develop strong feet, everything up chain becomes easier. You got to remember, it's the first contact you have with the ground. You want that contact to be strong.
Yeah, those orthotics were like a drug, basically. Let's treat a symptom instead of addressing the root cause.
Yeah, I think the ones I had were called super feet. They're pretty expensive orthotics, but it's exactly that. And again, it's not their fault. That's what they did for everyone with flat feet. And I had flat feet, but it's just because my feet weren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now it's really crazy to me. Like when I'm doing lifting or even when I'm sitting around, I wear toe socks. Have you seen those socks that are individually on your toes?
Yeah.
Okay, I know they may look really weird, and people may
You
go
could
on
even
Amazon.
have different colored toes if you want. If you want to get super fly.
Absolutely. But the cool thing that toe socks do is because they're individually wrapping your toes, and they're on your individual toes, they increase your proprioceptive awareness of what your toes are doing in space. Because oddly enough, socks themselves are kind of like shoes. They cast your foot and they cast your toes, and now your toes are just sitting around. But the toe socks help my toes have been moving this whole podcast. They're always doing things because now they're activated. And I'm not thinking about it. It's just what my toes are doing because my foot is doing what it's supposed to do. So the thing I think about is, God, if people could just, it doesn't cost money. You could get yourself any brand of barefoot shoes you want, get some toe socks, start walking around. That's all. Even if you don't want to go take a run, just jump rope. Let your feet get used to what the ground feels like. It's going to hurt for a little bit, especially if you've been wearing really tight shoes or really cushiony shoes. But if you do that over the next year, 2 years, the difference that's going to happen with your feet and then the difference that's going to happen with your whole body because of that one thing you fixed, dog, it's wild.
Yeah. We need to start, and you're doing it, man. Starting a foot revolution. You know what I mean? A foot evolution.
Evolution.
And listen, because you said it, one of the most profound things that you just said was that it's your first point of contact. So it's like this kinetic chain that goes from your foot to your brain and affecting everything in between. So a lot of knee issues are actually rooted in foot problems, right?
A lot of back issues are rooted to foot problems because, again, you make contact with the ground the wrong way. You don't understand that you're making contact the right way. Those forces are going to find somewhere to dissipate. And for a lot of people, it's the knees. For a lot of people, it's the lower back. For some people, it's the neck. Or, you know, it has to dissipate somewhere. And then it's just like, I think about people who are running, like they're like running as an exercise, and they're striking the ground in a non-ideal way over and over and over again. It's problematic.
Let's start off by talking about this new phenomenon in our culture called tech neck.
Tech neck.
And what are the implications that it has for us as a species?
Well, I mean, tech neck is just that curve, that forward curve of the upper back. That is, oh yeah, you're looking down, man. You can go anywhere, a restaurant, concert. Like you can even go to places where you're supposed to be looking at something else. You've paid to look at something else, and people are looking down at their phone, and their upper backs are curved forward, and then their necks are kind of curved in an opposite direction. And that's a human posture. I mean, we used to see it in people who are a lot older as the result of many decades of the weight of your head being under gravity and slowly curving forward. But now what makes it a tech neck is it's being practiced more regularly with the younger generation. And then you adapt, you know, like my big point is always like you're adapting to everything that you do all the time with your body. And so this is just in the same way sitting in a chair does a certain thing to your hips and knees. Like we've got this now device doing something to our neck. The one difference is the chair sort of kind of forces you into a 90-degree hip and knees. You can hold your hand for your device in a lot of different reasons, in a lot of different ways, but we just don't really think of any other. We don't really think at all. We just go to the device and then there's just the resultant posture. So I'm not really sure what it's going to look like. This is the first generation. Like as much as it seems like tech has been around, we can't really live without our smartphones. It's like 10, 12-year-old phenomenon. It's not that old. And
versus hundreds of thousands of years of humans in this current form.
That's right. Or even 40, or even your grandparents. You know what I mean? Like it is sudden onset. It's like sudden onset tech neck, forward flexion. So what I try to outline is, you know, you got swallowing going through there, you've got breathing going through there, you've got the discs in your spine that are affected by that position, the nerves, any tissue really in your upper back and neck, and then you have bone. All of these tissues and processes are in this new environment of tech neck, and we'll see what it looks like. But they're already, you know, different, not so much public health, but probably more in the medical community, starting to see more complaints of different things that arise with this particular habit, and are going, you know, adjust your posture. And there's been a number of articles just talking again, is there better ergonomics we could have when we're using our phone? Because it seems like using your phone less is maybe off the table, but you could also just put your phone down and do something else. So yeah, it's it'll be interesting to see if the environment of tech neck is going to be talked about in the way that we said sitting is the new smoking. Like I wonder if tech neck is going to have its own day with headlines such as that. It's like, oh, it was more harmful for our body than we knew.
Yeah. Being on your phone is the new Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah. I mean, it's just.
Because we're gonna have that muscular development too around this kind of movement or form that we're putting ourselves into as an adaptation, I would imagine as well.
Well, and I think the challenge, you know, people have been putting their head down to do stuff for a long time.
Right, reading. Because I think about that.
Tech neck is book neck. It's knitting neck. It's sewing machine neck. It's woodworking neck. It's working on your car neck. The problem is in the volume, right? It's the number of minutes, or, you know, dare I even say hours that we're doing it. And it's also the context in which it's happening, which is we're not really doing anything else with our body. Yeah. So like if your primary exercise program, if you will, is being on your phone, meaning you do that for 6 or 4 or 8 hours a day. And if you look at even your devices at work versus your actual exercise time, which is like 45 minutes or 60 minutes, like you are exercising tech neck more than you're doing bicep curls or other things with your body. So in a different environment, looking down so often might not even result in tech neck, right? Because I guess the question is, it's not really clear if tech neck is the position that you're in when you're on your phone, or if it's the adaptation to so much time being on your phone where it's harder to get out of that position. You know, I would sit in a chair, my knees and my hips go to a certain position, but if I get up out of it, they're not in that position anymore. So what's the big deal? It's in the hours and years and decades in a chair where when you get up out of the chair, you're not really getting all the way up out of the chair. You might be upright a little bit, but your pelvis is sort of has adapted to make sitting easy for you by never letting that really get loose, never really letting your spine uncurl all the way. So tech neck could also be thought of as the more permanent remnants of so much of that positioning, and that's going to be the thing that comes back to bite us in the butt.
Yeah, as you said, it's only been about a decade that we've been doing this and had this habit. And so to see what this generation, you know, our kids especially, what they're going to look like, you know, their functionality, their form, the adaptation from that position. But yeah, it's kind of scary and weird. But at the same time, you are pointing to some potential antidotes or movement nutrients, and one of them is the head ramp.
Right, the head
Can you
ramp.
describe that?
Well, I love the head ramp. So like I said, your technology does not depend on you being slumped forward to look at it. It works no matter what position you're in. So one, just know that. The head ramp is the very simple exercise of sliding your head back away from what you're looking at and lifting the top of it up towards the ceiling. So if you just grab your phone, you know, for a second, or, you know, a mime that is in your hand and look down at it, your head, which is pretty heavy, is out in front of you and tipped forward. So the head ramp is the opposite motion to that. You are bringing it back so that it sits over your shoulders, and you are lifting the top of it up towards the ceiling, but without raising your chin. I think a lot of times when your head's down and forward, you think, oh, I'll bring my head up. But now you've added a second bend in the neck. And so more than just lift your chin to bring your head up, I'm asking you to bring the whole noggin back to the wall behind you and up towards the ceiling. And that takes care of both curves in the upper back and the neck at the same time.
Is there like a physical cue we could think about with our head?
Yeah, I mean, if you just touch the top of your head and think of pushing, you know, if you leave your finger there and then push your head up against it, that's a really good way. If you like to use the wall, you can go up and stand against a wall with your shoulder blades against the wall, keep your rib cage down, and then try to bring your head back to the wall behind you, and you might find that your neck's tighter, your upper back's tighter than you thought. And you could do both at the same time. Bring your head to the wall behind you, and then push the finger that's on the top of your head up towards the ceiling, and you're moving in two planes at the same time.
And you detail this wonderfully, and there's so many cool like visual cues and physical cues for us. And since reading your book, Rethink Your Position, pick up a copy today. I've been doing these things. Even today I was on a stationary bike, and I thought now, because I'm aware of it, I think about what is my head position. And again, there are going to be certain positions that we're in that it's not going to be, quote, perfect.
No.
But we can get ourselves in a more ideal position. And also that's a movement input that it's going to be balanced by other things versus, like you said, historically people are going, you know, sewing, woodworking, you know, reading. But then there was a much more movement-rich environment outside of that.
Sure.
Now we're spending hours upon hours on our devices like this with a very low movement input culture on top of that. And so having some simple remedies like this are important. And the other one that I've been adding to the mix is the chicken head. And as soon as I read that part, I'm like, what is she getting into with the chicken? Because from where I'm from, chicken head means something else. I don't know.
I don't even know what it is, but should I look it up or no?
You know, it's like a kind of a, you know, it's a hood
Okay.
chick.
Okay.
Yeah. So
A chicken head. All right.
yeah. Chicken. Shout out to Project Pat. Anyways, but chicken head, your definition in here is something different and incorporates some really interesting movements that just makes you feel better.
Yeah, well, mine's based on just having chickens. And chickens have this, if you ever pick up a chicken, you can move a chicken around, but its head stays still, and they have tremendous neck mobility. And so, yeah, it's this idea of taking yourself more regularly through your neck's range of motions. And so, like, what are all the things that chickens do? The main one is they move their head forward and back. So our heads are forward, but there's a balancing move to that, and that's sliding it back. And then there's just the idea of stretching your neck to the right and to the left, and of course turning to the right and to the left, and dropping your right ear and the left ear. And then of course there's sliding your ears to the right and to the left. And all of these are movements that you would want to happen between your head and shoulders. But we don't have really very much that's facilitating these movements any longer. And then combined with the phone, now we've got something that's facilitating one neck position over and over and over again. So chicken head is this invitation to explore 8 more neck motions to balance out maybe the one that you're overdoing, or like when we talk about movement nutrients, the one movement nutrient you're over consuming. You're overeating forward head. So now we need to get these other neck motions into your movement diet, and then just like all nutrients, you're better for it. You feel better for it.
Yeah, please, I want everybody to really listen to this, because we don't think about these things until a problem occurs, right?
Always.
And a lot of folks are dealing with random neck issues. If you're not giving these inputs in controlled situations that you can actually have some input and like put yourself in these dynamic positions, so that when it comes to a situation where your neck is moved suddenly or you do a certain thing, like your neck has been there before. It has a little bit of a memory of being in a different position. But oftentimes we're just kind of stuck in a certain position for most of the day. And so giving us these movement cues and these inputs is super helpful, especially now.
Yeah, it's about resiliency in the end. Our culture doesn't really require much movement. There's not a lot of movement demanded out of us on a day-to-day basis. And so we can do well in society without moving. But biologically, we stop doing as well, which eventually can trickle down to how well you feel you're being able to perform in society. And that means even like showing up for relationships, right? When you're in chronic pain, it's hard to show up for other people when you're sort of nursing yourself in your head. It's hard to be in pain and engage outwardly, because you're using a tremendous amount of energy and focus on coping. And so resiliency, I don't only mean physical resiliency. I just mean the ability to engage in something that suddenly comes up. And that can be, we usually talk about accidents, like you trip on something, you're in an unexpected situation that moves your body differently, that it doesn't do tremendous harm. Illnesses come up, life comes up, deaths come up, other problems. And when you're more physically resilient in this way, when you move more of your parts, you can respond to that trauma, whether it's an accident, even something like a car accident, right? Like even something that is large, you aren't taking like the stiffest, least mobile version of yourself to everything else that you do. So like it's a little bit different than a fitness reasoning for exercise. It's not mutually exclusive. Like it has all the fitness benefits too, but I think as we see fewer people be interested in moving their bodies, trying to talk about it in a different way of just getting more out of your daily life, is how I want to frame it. How I want to frame it now, which is why we got to move our necks like a chicken sometimes.
You mentioned this a little bit earlier about even sitting in a chair.
Mm-hmm.
We're never just really sitting there. We're still being moved. We're moved in a certain position, and we're adapting to that. Our bodies are trying to become efficient at the things that we are exposed to, I believe, probably most often. And can you expand on that a little bit more? Because when we have a body that's very good at chair sitting, it might be, and I'm saying this sarcastically, it might be compromising your ability to do other things, right? So if you go from that sitting position, sitting in a chair for whatever, 8-10 hours a day, and that's not far-fetched, by the way, for most of us, and then, you know, you suddenly want to go to Disneyland, you know, with your family, and you find like, wait a minute, I'm not really physically equipped to do this thing without pain or potential injury.
And that's what I've been trying to get across, I would say, throughout my entire career, is like we definitely have this idea of like, I'm in shape, I'm out of shape, I'm fit, I'm unfit, I'm moving and I'm not moving. It's more accurate to say that you're actually always moving. You're always moving. And you're always adapting to the movement that you are doing. This is chair movement that I'm doing right now. And so if you could add like a dash movement to everything, this is bike movement that I'm doing right now. These are driving movements. These are office movements. This is shopping movements. So if you start thinking about my body is responding to what I'm doing right now, and then you pair that with a tenet of just exercise science, which is you adapt to what you do most frequently. We're all sort of, I've said this before, we're like the ninjas of sitting. We're chair athletes. And in athletes, like if you think about athletics, like really good athletes have specialized in their sport. And they've adapted their anatomy and their physiology. Sometimes, you know, they've grown more muscle mass, they've grown more capillaries. Sometimes they've twisted, there's been twists. You know, professional baseball pitchers will have actual bone formations that they have created through the way that they are playing that makes throwing easier on their body to a certain point. We are chair athletes. We are just really great at sitting. And one of the reasons we have a hard time doing other things is because we are the best at this physically. We have the anatomy. We have made the anatomical adaptations for this. To do other things would require more capillaries, more range of motion. And so when you're like, oh man, I really want to just start moving more, just realize that that's what you're working uphill against, is just you have chair anatomy right now. You want to figure out whatever it is that you want to do. You want to do this. Maybe you want to go on a backpacking trip, or maybe there's like a cool hike in your town that you would like to do, or maybe it's you would like to be able to go to Disneyland, but you know it's a physical event. It's Disneyland movement. What does it entail? 7 hours of being on my feet. You know, like break everything down into the movement it entails, remove all the judgment about where you are right now and how hard it's going to be, and then you're like, I need to start training the anatomy to be able to do that thing. And then it's like, okay, well, I'm using the back of my chair right now as I'm talking to you. Maybe I'm going to still sit with my hips, but I'm going to change my torso sitting anatomy so I'm holding myself a little bit more, because when I'm standing at Disneyland, my torso is going to have to do that. I don't even have to get out of my chair. I can still work. I can still watch Netflix. I can still do this podcast with you, but I can also use more of my musculature to hold me up right now. And once you start thinking about it that way, it's like, yeah, I just have too much chair anatomy. I want whatever other anatomy. And then you start picking the body parts or break the final thing that you want to do into the movements that it entails. I have to put something on my back. I have to carry something in my arms. I need my shoulder to be able to stretch this way. And that becomes your training program.
We started the book, that's chapter 1. We started that for a reason, in part because we love the test that's associated with it. And the test that's associated with that chapter is you just get up and down off the floor without putting your hands
crisscross applesauce.
And the backstory on that test is there was a study done some years ago that people who could get up and down off the floor without putting their hands down lived longer, and lived better, which I think is what we're all really looking for. And so what we realized is that people don't sit on the ground enough. In our culture, we're always chair bound. We're, driving, commuting, sitting in chairs at our offices. Our whole environment is set up to be sitting in chairs all the time. And so we've literally lost the ability to both get up and down off the ground and sit comfortably on the floor. I mean, it's really interesting when we suggest to people like, oh, okay, well, you need to start this test by being crisscross applesauce. And a lot of people go, crisscross applesauce? What? I can't sit like that. And so it's just an ability that we've really lost that's so fundamental as humans. And, you know, what we've recommended to people is that they just add more sitting on the floor while they're watching Netflix, which is something that we know everybody's doing at least 3 hours of a day. And so we just think it's so fundamental as a human to be able to get up and down off the ground. And also it makes us more durable. And I think the word we like, and we're fans of all things longevity, and obviously this book is connected to that. But I think the word we prefer is durability, because really Kelly and I don't care if we live to be 100. We want to live as long as we live, but feel good for as long as possible, and then just like fall off a cliff and die. That's our goal. Like we just kind of want to be like this and then fall off the cliff and die and feel as good as we can and live independently and be able to move with our body and hopefully keep our mental acuity. That's really our goal. And to us, that's more durability, because if that means we live to be 85 or 90, like great, we would rather feel good and then just fall off the cliff. So I think that sitting on the ground thing is so fundamental to this book, and seems so straightforward, but really is strangely revolutionary since we never do it.
When I saw the going off the cliff, I pictured you both, your faces on some lemming bodies and going off that cliff happily.
We're like this. Go ahead, put your hand on. There we go. Julie will be driving.
Listen, this is so simple, but, you know, and I actually want to share this. I noted this. You just mentioned the study. This was published in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology, and it revealed that this simple act, this simple test was correlated with how long people lived. And you also share, because if it's a concern of being able to sit cross-legged on the floor, you share a variety of mobilization exercises throughout the book, and in particular in this chapter, and habits that we can use to improve performance on this particular test. And just to share with you guys, I had my 11-year-old son do it, which you would see him and think, oh, this kid isn't flexible. He did it easily, like easily.
Yeah.
For me, it wasn't super easy. I could do it, but it wasn't just like as
You felt a little creaking as
graceful.
you were standing up.
I mean, just to see how it was like he's, you know, like it was like he was flying, just the way he did it so easily. But you mentioned, you talk about these mobilizations, 90-90 sitting, cross-leg sitting in and of itself, leg up, one leg up sitting, hip opener exercises. Can you talk about some of these things?
The first order of business for anything is to do the thing you want to get better at. Not a correlate, not a test for it. Yeah. So this first opening chapter is a little sneaky, because what we do is we get people in with something that they can wrap their heads around, right? Which is, I should be able to do this. I watch kids do it, sitting on the ground. And quickly you're confronted with, wow, I really struggle with that, or that was harder than I thought. And it's a nice test because it illuminates this idea that, hey, we're not interested in gymnast level mobility. We're interested in the central idea of, can you move and own your way through your world? What is it you want to do? And a lot of times, because the body's so durable and because our world is shaped a certain specific way, we're not really confronted with limitations until you go to yoga and you're like, wow, I can't do that. Or I want to learn a new skill and that was really challenging. I can't put my arms over my head and we're going climbing today. So one of the things that we try to do with this book is create this language of vital signs, because you're not going to die tomorrow if you can't get up off the ground. That's not what it is. But it helps you begin to establish some benchmarks around how you move and some of your other behaviors. And the follow-up to that is, the first order of business to get better at this is to sit on the ground. Right. And we're realizing that instead of applying some fancy tool, or here's our 10-day optimized sit on the ground program, in front of the TV, let's see if we can work this into your life, where we can begin to work on your hip range of motion in the background. The mobilizations in there are something we call position transfer exercises. They're just sneaky ways to give you a window of opportunity so that you can move more freely. And in this situation, the expression of mid-range hip range of motion inflection is getting up and down off the ground. So we've got some tools in there to help you restore those positions. But the first thing is knowing that, hey, that was a little bit trickier than I thought. Maybe I should spend some more time doing it. Or B, I crushed that. Don't need to worry about it because I sit on the ground all the time, and I'm a yogi and my hip range of motion is good.
Yeah.
Well, and also some of those positions you mentioned, like 90-90 sitting and long sit, for most people who don't spend a lot of time sitting on the floor, they will naturally need to change positions. For most people, sitting cross-legged for an hour is like not possible. Like, most of us who have spent a lot of time sitting, it's just not possible or comfortable to sit that long. So the cool thing is your body will actually kind of give you these cues to move, and you're like, all right, well, I'm no longer comfortable sitting cross-legged, so I'm going to move to 90-90, or I'm going to move to long sit. And if you just watch someone sort of practice sitting on the ground, it's actually subconscious. You naturally just move from position to position. And so without even thinking about it, you're getting all this work on your hip range of motion, and it's most of it is just subconscious, and the only real conscious thing you've done is decide to sit on the floor versus sit on the couch.
Let's talk specifically about chair sitting as we're sitting in chairs, hanging out with each other, which you said this term that is just burned into my mind now, marathon sitting, right? So we spend an insane amount of time in our culture just sitting in a chair.
Sure.
What's happening in our bodies, like our biomechanics, when we spend a lot of time sitting in a chair?
Well, I'll just start by saying Kelly can talk about the specifics, but I'll start by saying, just to sort of define marathon sitting, I think what we've learned with the research is that if you sit for short periods of time and get up and continue moving around and sit back down, that's actually completely fine. Like we've never set out to demonize sitting, and sitting's awesome and we do plenty of it. But what you do see is people are sitting in a chair and often doing that for 5, 6, 8 longer, even longer sometimes, without actually moving at all. And Kelly's obsessed with the lymphatic system, which is basically the sewage system of the
every
body.
middle-aged man.
And so one of the things that happens when we sit is that, the way that you clear your lymphatic system, you clear the waste out of your body, is through movement. So
Specifically muscle contraction.
one of the things we like to talk about is, like, have you ever been on a flight and then you get to wherever you're going and you have cankles? Have you ever gotten cankles?
I can't say that I have, but I've seen them. I've seen them on the streets.
Oh, yeah. I've read about it.
You've seen
I've read
cankles.
about
You've
it.
seen cankles. But that's just a function of sitting in an airplane and not moving enough for long periods of time. Like sitting on a 5 or 6 hour flight is like the perfect example of marathon sitting. And one of the downstream negative consequences is that you're not moving and you're not flushing your system. You're not getting the garbage out of your body. And it's just, and then the other thing I'll say, and Kelly can talk about the technical terms about this, but I mean, then you're sitting all the time with all of your joints at 90-degree angles. And we're not meant to be at 90-degree angles with our joints all the time. And so I think a lot of people don't make the connection between low back pain and general stiffness and other issues they have with just bouts of marathon sitting.
And what you start to play around with is there's a whole new field called sedentary biology, where we're starting to understand a little bit about what happens to our physiology, our normal processing of our bodies when we don't move. So we can define not sitting versus standing, but we can define sedentary behavior in a very scientific and very specific way. If you ever remember the old Stairmaster machines from like the 90s,
I love those
early
things.
2000s, for those of you out there who are from the 90s,
That was me.
there was a metric on there that you could use, which was METs. Do you remember METs? And you'd be like, I don't know how many METs is, but I'm killing the MET game right now, right? You just jack it up, all the METs. That's a metabolic equivalent. That's how much energy it takes kind of for a human being to run. And so what they have defined at Harvard as sedentary behavior is falling below 1.5 metabolic equivalents. And it turns out sitting immediately really starts to truncate how much energy we're using. So we fall below that 1.5 metabolic equivalents, and then our physiology starts to get weird. We start not being able to burn sugar, and we start to do things strangely, and things are not moving and working as well as they can. So really it's not ever about sitting versus standing. It's about,
Not
hey,
moving.
how do I limit this below 1.5 metabolic equivalents? So again, man, if you're exhausted, sit down, it feels so good to take it off. But maybe you could get more movement in. And what the research is defined is, let's try to limit and aggregate that total amount of time below 1.5 metabolic equivalents to 6 hours. So you have sort of 6 hours of coins you can put into whatever machine you want. This is my commute, this is my dinner time, this is hanging out. And maybe we can try to limit that, because it really makes it more difficult for us to do the things we want to do. Hey, I want to change my body composition. Well, that's going to make that more difficult. I want to be more awesome at sprinting. Well, that's going to make that more difficult. I want to have healthier tissues. I want to have more clarity in my brain. It makes that more difficult. So again, that allows us to expand. And when we empower people with that idea, say, hey, wow, I really been sitting a long time. Let me see if I can limit that in whatever way I want.
So can we talk about this interaction with the chair itself, pressing up against, or us, our weight pressing up against the chair, and the intermingling going on with our hamstrings versus when we're being a little bit more, dare I say, natural sitting on the floor?
I'm just going to cue you up to say panini.
Panini.
And then you take it away.
We'll do a couple experiments here. One is your butt and hamstrings are actually non-weight bearing surfaces. If you actually sit on the ground, you're sitting on your ischial tuberosities. The bottom of your pelvis is kind of bony and set up for it, right? And when we're sitting in the chair, we're not actually sitting on the bony structures of our pelvis. We're sitting on all the soft tissue structures. So if you imagine high pressure, I'm like 106 kilos. I weigh, my temperature is a certain amount. That's how you make panini, high pressure, high temperature. I mean, you get grilled cheese. So if you're worried about your hamstring range of motion, maybe you shouldn't make grilled cheese sandwiches out of your hamstrings. We could also do another experiment. I haven't said this in a long, long time, but bear with me. Think of the most beautiful person you could think of. You got it in your head?
Got it.
Like for me, like Chris Pine and Chris Hemsworth have a baby, and that baby boy grows up to marry Brad Pitt, and they have a baby, right? You can see like that's a beautiful
What about
person.
Kate?
Kate's in there too. And if you think of that person's butt, what does it look like?
Wow.
It's gorgeous, right? Now think about your palm of your hand.
Yeah.
And your hand is a weight-bearing surface, and it's the connective tissue is gnarly. And now think if that butt of that person looked like the palm of your hand. It is not. So what you're seeing is we have certain areas of the body that are really good at weight bearing, like your feet, your hands, these sit bones. And then we have areas that aren't. It's such a problem when people sit for a long time, like the Aerolan chair, right? That really expensive chair by Herman Miller. They invented that chair working with people who were in wheelchairs who had diabetic ulcers. So what was happening was that people would get these pressure ulcers when they had to sit in a wheelchair for a long period of time. So they invented this fabric that allowed to unload the connective tissue. Well, that's a small scale model of us all the time, sitting on tissues. They're not getting good blood flow. We're not pumping the garbage out. Do you need to be worried about it? I don't making this doom and gloom, but that's just a snapshot of sort of, hey, long periods of time, that's probably not great. Then you add in, we're not really having access to all the mechanisms that stabilize our spines. So we can't really connect your pelvis to your hips very well. We can't use your glutes. We can't use the rotators. We can't stabilize. So you end up using a whole bunch of other things to keep yourself upright. And that's fine until you go stand up. And then when you realize you're like, oh, get out of that chair and you're a little creaky, that's your body not really just immediately giving you access to your full range of motion.
There's a quote from your book. It says, once you start sitting on the floor and standing more, you'll find that it not only feels natural, but that you'll crave it. And when I read that, I was like, that is my exact experience. My body tells me I'm craving. I was just sitting with my wife last night, and you've got like a sectional couch that latches together. She's got her areas. My youngest son calls it the queendom spot.
Yes.
Right? And so I have to ask permission to come sit by her over here because it's just a thing. And so I'm sitting there, and she's coming to kind of get in the nook on my left side, and she's laying there for a bit. And the reason she doesn't like to get comfortable in that, because she knows I'm going to get up. And so after a certain amount of time, I just felt my body just like, go sit on the floor. What are you doing? Go sit on the floor. And also, one of the things that starts to happen, which, because I was talking to you guys today, is the first time I'm saying the words out loud. While we were sitting there, watching whatever show it was, maybe like 5-10 minutes into it, my leg starts doing this. Like my legs just starts bouncing up and down. And I don't know that I'm doing it, but all of a sudden she grabs my leg and like silences my leg. And I felt like, get your hands off me.
You can't contain
Yeah. You're like, I need to move.
She's like, stop. I'm like, babe, I'm just expressing myself. I said something, but I knew what it was. Just like I wanted to move. I wanted to change positions, but she was comfortable and, the whole thing. And so literally once you start getting these movement inputs, your body starts to crave them. It'll tell you. But there's something really seductive about sitting in a chair where a lot of stuff starts turning off. And,
Perfect. That's what we should be doing. Let's sit down to turn stuff off. That's great.
Exactly right.
That's the right time and application. I've been on my feet all day. It's time to change gears. I need to relax. What's that look like as a kind of conscious strategy?
Well, and I think like one of the ways I know that I've shifted over into that crave way is that, way back in the day, I used to be able to sit on a flight and I didn't find it to be comfortable, but I wasn't dying. And now I'm dying on a flight.
Is that because you have OCS?
I might have OCS, but but while I'm sitting there, it's not that I'm physically uncomfortable sitting. It's that I literally want to jump out of the chair and move around. Yeah. And I struggle with that. And in a way, I think that's a positive thing because
you become an 11-year-old boy.
That tells me that I've shifted over to that exact thing we talked about in the book, which is really craving, wanting to keep moving my body into different positions. And ultimately that's the goal. And I think people listening to this actually can get to that place. I think maybe people will think, well, look at those are the fitness guys. And of course they crave movement or something, but I think it's really possible for people to practice some of these things, practice sitting on the ground, practice standing a little more at the office, standing a little more throughout the day. And then I really do think your body starts to really crave that feeling. And then that's when, you've won.
You also dedicate a vital sign to hip extension, which we'll save that. I want to make sure everybody picks up a copy because it was kind of like one of those things where if you're pulling my leg on what is most important, which you set it up saying there's nothing that's more important than anything else when it comes to mobility, but hip extension is super important. But I want people to read that chapter, but in it you have a sidebar about the booty, all right? And I think it's titled like the rear view, right? And you mentioned something along the lines of our butts are sleepy. All right, our butt cheeks are sleeping on the job, and you kind of give a command or a cue for us to check in with our butt through the day and fire those. We can do it right now.
Can I just interject and say that if
squeeze your butt.
if Kelly's name had a subtitle, it would be Kelly Starrett, hip extension. Because he's really excited about it.
I may or may not also own already on Instagram, knees behind butt guy. Trying to get you into hip extension. Look, what you're hinting at is a really interesting phenomenon where, if you lose connection or we're not using it, we can see decrease in function around muscles and movements more importantly. And this hip extension chapter, one of the things that happens when we lose the ability to get into a lunge shape. So walking is a little mini lunge shape. A big lunge, formal lunge is a big extended version of that. If you've ever seen
running is like a mid lunge.
Yeah. And if you've ever seen someone sprint, that is lunge form, that hip extension. And one of the things we see is if you cannot get into that position for whatever reason, we don't know if it's your hips are stiff, or your quads stiff, you're never there. But if you can't get in that position, oftentimes what we see is you can't also squeeze your butt as effectively. And in fact, in that position particularly, your glutes become very difficult to find. We call it positional inhibition, which means I'm in this position and it's my inability to be strong in this position that has shut my butt off from my ability to recruit that glute squeeze. And what we know is that when we start reconnecting the dots for people, things like low back pain starts to get better, right? We got a big engine starting to help me manage that a little bit. When we start to see people working on their hip extension, guess what? Your knees have to work when your leg's behind your body. And because we spend so much time not in that position, we see that ends up being a blind spot for a lot of people. We have a couple new products on the market that were tools for us. And one of them is a Bulgarian split squat pad. So if you've ever done a Bulgarian split squat, it's where you basically get into a lunge shape and then you go up and down. And it is gnarly. No one likes to do it.
But your rear foot is elevated.
Rear foot is elevated, a rear foot elevated split squat. But it is such a good movement. And again, no one likes to do them. Why? Because that's a position we suck. Meanwhile, we also made this thing for better booty thrusts or hip thrusts. You lay down on the bar, you could just do this beautiful hip thrust. I'm so proud of this thing. It sells 10 to 1. Why? Because everyone loves the booty thrust because you can feel your booty. Guess who loves to get into the split lunge position? 0 people. Well, it's like I made like, here's some really toxic, gnarly vegetables that are really good for you, eat those. Like, no one wants those. Like, give me the cookies. I want the booty. I want the hip flexion.
Back to the movement-rich environment and standing a little bit, though. I mean, you know, we do actually talk about just like being conscious of squeezing your butt throughout the day. And you can do that while you're standing. So, you know, it's actually for me become something that's subconscious, but I'm always playing with my foot position, squeezing my butt throughout the day when I'm standing. And then, you know, obviously when I get tired, I will take a seat, but you know, it's just being conscious of making sure to keep those things active and going and, you know, aware that the 90-degree angle is not great.
Let me ask you this. When you exercise, do you do it first thing in the morning, or do you work in and around all the other day job you have?
It's in the morning, not first thing, but it's definitely in the early part of the day.
One of the things that we see if you have a movement, if you change your environment to be more conducive to moving more, is that you're more able to be warmed up for your workout. So if you work out at lunch and you've been sitting all day, it's going to take you a little while to get all the lights on in the house, get the diesel running and warmed up. But if you've been moving more, squeezing your butt, working on your balance, changing position, fidgeting, you're going to be able to slip right into that quick 30-minute Peloton, that hour-long CrossFit class, whatever it is you want to do. You'll find that you can be better prepared more quickly. And then on the other side of that, we see that you can continue to decongest and you don't have to do as long a warm down because you're constantly moving. Versus if you want to feel the recipe for getting old, do some gnarly workout, then sit in a chair for an hour. And let me tell you how you feel when you wake up. When you stand up from that, you're going to feel terrible.
One of my favorite sections of the book is when you're talking about the importance of walking. It's called Walk This Way. Shout out to Aerosmith. I don't know if that was on purpose.
It was.
Okay.
Shout out.
Of course.
Showing our age.
And so you detailed how the amount of steps that you actually take each day is deeply connected to our lifespan. And we often don't think about this, you know, because we, quote, work out, that is not set aside in a sense, because we're probably going to be walking around, moving around while we're working out, but that doesn't insulate you for your body's requirement, your DNA's requirement for you to actually walk and to put these steps in.
So when we opened the gym in 2005, when I went to physio school, I was like, we're gonna corner the world on walking. We're gonna make walking. That was not what I wanted to be known for.
It's a hard sell.
But we've now become obsessed with walking for a variety of reasons. I mean, you hit on it a little bit. There are I will go back and say that the 10,000 steps concept was invented by a Japanese pedometer company in the 60s.
And 10,000 is an auspicious number in Japan. Maybe last 10,000 years. When you shout bonsai, that's 10,000 years. So you can see why that marketing worked really well, because we were capturing this magical number.
But what's happened since then, though, is there has been a ton of research that has filled that in and shown that basically the more steps you take a day, the longer you will live and the fewer chronic illnesses you will suffer.
That means I just always need to max out my steps, or is there a minimum?
The minimum we say is 8,000. The reason we say that is that the average American gets about 3,000 steps. And we've also read that it's actually possible for people to get up to 8,000 steps. Anything above 8,000 is like gold. That's great. Like if you have a life that allows you to be able to walk 16,000 steps a day, like more power to you. That's definitely going to help your longevity. But there's so many other things about walking that are so awesome. We talked a little bit about the lymphatic system and about how walking is the perfect way to recover from workouts. And, it's the first thing that we suggest people do who come to us with low back pain or post-surgical, because, the best thing you can do post-surgery is just to walk and just keep everything, get the garbage out of your body. But there's all these other sort of like fluffier things about walking that we like so much. I mean, we talked about this earlier. Everybody's talking about it online, but you need to get a little bit of sunlight on your body. Sometimes you need to get a little direct sun. One of the best ways to do that is
the Model Health Show says
you need to get some sun on your body. So it has this side benefit if you get some sun on your body. It can also be really social, because what we learned in the pandemic is how lonely people are, and how depressed, and kids aren't doing well from a mental health standpoint. People are feeling, even though we're more and more connected online, people are feeling more and more disconnected. And so walking is the perfect way to just have simple connection with people. And so it's just this like moment.
You can be like this. What's up? I hate that guy. but he's my neighbor. What's up? I now live in a community.
And we're
guy.
fine. We're fine if you treadmill walk. Like if it's, if you live in Buffalo, New York, and you need to walk on a treadmill in the winter, that's totally fine.
Or walk in the mall.
Walk in the mall, exactly.
right.
I mean, there's a lot of empty malls out there you can walk in. It doesn't matter. Even if it's just walking around the block. I mean, one of the things I've done is I've figured out like 5 places in my neighborhood that are little routes that are just leaving from my front door, walking around the neighborhood. And it's like, I know from my house to the end of the block, it's 1,750 steps. If I go from my house down this little mini loop, it's 3,000 steps. And so, if I just need to fit in some walking, I've sort of set it up for myself. And, you get your hip into extension. Speaking of Kelly's obsession with hip extension, it's good for the soul. It's good for the community.
Check this out. We were working with an elite military force in the Army called Delta. And when they have a lot of disordered sleep, and they do, one of the things that they started prescribing for all of their soldiers and warfighters was walking. So you have all the technology in the world available to you, and the thing that's handed out is walking 12 to 15,000 steps a day. So if you're listening to this, hear this. If you have a hard time falling asleep or sleeping, one of the ways that we would help you with that is say, hey, let's see if we get you to move more in the day, to accumulate enough non-exercise activity that you actually have sleep stress, so that, or it's actually called sleep pressure, so that you actually want to go to sleep. You actually have to move more in order to be fatigued enough. And if you're been on deadlines and you're sitting and you're in board meetings, you can't move, and you're on Zoom and you have a hard time falling asleep, one of the reasons is you didn't move. So as Juliet says, it's one of these things that makes a huge, huge difference on so many levels. And for us, again, we're like sort of obsessed with performance. And one of the things we notice when we give this book to our athlete friends, like world champion friends, are like, wow, I don't walk enough. And when I started walking, my knees felt better. I recovered from my workouts more effectively. Zone 2, we also found that the walking is a perfect time to do all these crazy breath drills. You can do all the eye movement tracking stuff you want. You could just call checking out your neighbors, right? Where your eyes track. You can look far. You can look close. Yep. You can start doing breath holds. There's so many ways where you can turn that thing up and make it interesting. Plus, we have so many friends who are like, I'm not running. Over my dead body, I'm never running. We're like, great. Have you met the backpack that weighs 10 pounds? And suddenly you have a really and meaningful way to load your spine and load your tissues. It's called rucking. Welcome to walking. It is the future.
Well, and I think one of the things we have done a good job of in the health and fitness business is tell people they should exercise. And they're spending trillions of dollars on gym memberships and apps and, you name it. But that's not working. Like the data has out, like we people really didn't go to the gym that much until starting in the early 90s. Like gym culture wasn't a thing. And we've all been now going to the gym and following the rule that we should exercise for X amount of time a day and X amount of time per week. And what we see is that obesity rates are rising and diabetes rates are rising. And, it's not, that alone isn't working. So we, of course, are gigantic fans of exercise. Like we're exercisers. We love exercise. But what we see is that people aren't getting enough total movement in their day. And it has all of these unintended downstream consequences. Your body doesn't feel as good. You can't move as freely. You potentially don't sleep as well. And there are lots of other ways to get non-exercise activity. Like that could be gardening. There's lots of ways to keep moving more besides just walking. But what we found is that's the simple and most accessible way for people to just add in more movement in their day.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
We see situations where people will actually have pain when there's no tissue damage, but they believe there's the potential for it. And when you can make people believe there's the potential for tissue damage, you can create pain.